Hello, welcome back. I made a video a little while back about U.S. Philippine coins because there wasn't a whole lot of videos on YouTube about that topic. There are even less videos on YouTube about the topic of U.S. Philippine paper money. And so I wanted to make a video about that, offer a little context and some examples, and talk about the highlights and categories of paper money that was produced while the Philippines was a U.S. territory. As I mentioned, I made a video about the coins, right? Starting in 1903. Well, just back up a little bit. The U.S. takes over the Philippines during the Spanish-American War in 1898 from the Spanish. They then fight a lengthy and costly war against the Filipinos, who wanted their independence at that time. The U.S. wasn't ready to give the Philippines independence at that time. So that fighting lasts from 1899 all the way until about 1913. But by about 1902, 1903, they controlled most of the country, and they started producing coins for the Philippines, some in the San Francisco Mint, like this 1905 peso. Later, a mint would be established in Manila, a U.S. branch mint in Manila, which most Americans don't know about, and it produced coins from 1920 until 1941. And here's a 20 centavo that was produced, which carries the M mint mark, as opposed to S for San Francisco or D for Denver, or sometimes P for Philadelphia. It's the M mint mark. So pretty cool stuff. But nobody wants to carry around, 50 or 100 of these heavy silver pesos, which weigh almost an ounce and are 90% silver, by the way. They don't want to carry those around. And so they started issuing paper money at first in the form of silver certificates. I don't have any of the silver certificates to show you because they were only made from 1903 until 1916. And a little bit harder to get my hands on to show you. But they look very similar to these bills we're going to look at, the same size actually. They started producing this size you see, which is the standard size of a U.S. dollar, with those silver certificates in 1903, when American notes were still large size bills. Let's see if I have a large size note I can show you. Yes, large size bills were this bigger size here at the time. But it was figured out that this was actually a better size, and so U.S. notes shifted to this size fully in 1928. But after the silver certificates, of course, specifically could be stated on them that could be redeemed for silver. They switched to notes like this, which say they can be redeemed for silver or gold. And then when we go off the gold standards, they start saying, here's a later one, that was in 1929, this is in 1944, silver or the currency of the United States, or equivalent value. And they switched from silver certificates to treasury certificates. In 1918 is when the first treasury certificates come out. Now, what I find really interesting about these bills is, and the reason I'm interested in these bills, as an American, I do love South Pacific and Asian history, but one of the things that's really interesting about these bills is that they are that's just the U.S. connection. So sometimes you'll find them with the world money, but really they're U.S. money. And specifically on a lot of the bills, they put American leaders and heroes on the U.S. Philippines money, which feels to me like they're kind of rubbing salt in the wound a little bit. But have to show you some of these. This is in 1921 with President William McKinley on the bill. He's on all the fives. Of course, he was the president when the Philippines were taken from Spain and subsequently taken over by the United States until his vice president, Theodore Roosevelt, finished the job, I suppose, after McKinley was assassinated back in the U.S. That's a 1924 bill there. Also on the 5 later on, because they don't want them to be confused too much with American bills, so they changed the design here to include McKinley and Admiral Dewey. Of course, Admiral Dewey was the naval leader of the U.S. naval forces when the Philippines was captured. And so he's on there. And quite shocking, and maybe the most amazing bill to me, is the George Washington bill. As on all the 10s, from the silver certificates all the way through to the Victory series. That's George Washington, obviously. And now, those are all political leaders except for Dewey, right, who mainly fought the Spanish to take the Philippines. But then a lot of U.S. Army generals fought to keep the Philippines. And one of those was General Lawton. General Henry Lawton was an officer in the American Civil War. He fought in the Indian Wars, capturing the Apache chief Geronimo. And he was the only general killed in the Philippine-American War. And he is on the 50 peso bill. So you see him here. There are 4 types of bills. I mentioned the silver certificate. I mentioned the treasury certificate. There's also the Philippine National Bank bill, which has permission and backing to issue money. They still say they still have the American portrait on there. And some of these bills, a lot of them say the United States somewhere on them, sometimes in a little bit different places. But the Philippine National Bank is the 3rd type of bill. And these 3, well, the silver certificates stop, but the treasury certificates and the Philippine National Bank certificates continue to circulate simultaneously, as well as, very interestingly, these Bank of the Philippine Island notes. Now, the Bank of the Philippine Islands was actually an older bank under the Spanish. It was called El Banco Español Filipino. And they changed their name to an English name after the Americans took over and stayed in business. They changed it to the Bank then of the Philippine Islands, or BPI. They issued notes under the Spanish rule, paper notes, and they continued issuing paper notes until 1933. So this would be one of the last series of bills that they issue. This 5 peso here. They did not have American portraits on them. They had sort of these Victorian-looking ladies on all the different denominations. I only have a 5 available to show you, but so those 3 would have circulated together for a while, and then when the BPI stopped issuing bills, then it would have been the 2. But the Philippines, of course, as it was in our coin story, the Philippines is taken over in 1941 by the Japanese. And so, very interesting story. They burn a lot of paper money. They smuggle gold and silver out on a U.S. submarine, the USS Trout, the Philippine Treasury. But there's millions of silver pesos in their treasury, and some of those have to be dumped into the ocean. But during that time, the Japanese take over, and so this money ceases to exist for a while until the United States starts to take back over the Philippines, and then they start issuing bills again. They start printing them in 1944. When we start to take back the Philippines and circulate, and they are stamped Victory across the back. So they're all treasury certificates that are made in 1944. They're called the Victory series. In every denomination, here's the 2, here's the 1, the 10, all of them, even this is a 50 over here. They all have the Victory series, and those are popular, to collect as World War II artifacts on top of those interested in U.S. money and Philippine money. I should mention the smaller bills do have Filipino heroes on them. Rizal, who was actually a revolutionary leader as the Philippines was trying to gain independence from Spain, and he's sort of considered, he's a little bit like George Washington as far as our founding father, although he didn't live because he was executed by the Spanish, but he's one of the considered probably the most important founding father of the Philippine independence movement. Of course, Philippines does eventually get its independence after World War II in 1946. And they become a little bit more independent in 1935 as the U.S. Slowly grants them Commonwealth status and then independence. And Mabani is also a Philippine leader who is known for being the brains of the revolution, I understand. Let's see, other denominations. There are also some larger denominations. There's 100 and a 500. Ferdinand Magellan is on one of those, which is kind of interesting that the U.S. even kept him on of course, the Spanish explorer who found the Philippines. And then there's some other individuals along the way. Yeah, Magellan's on the 100. Some other individuals along the way. One other thing happens. There's one more. So the Victory is considered an overprint. Yeah, and of course, some bills aren't overprint. Some older bills are overprinted too. And then, of course, the 1944 bills are all overprint. There's one more overprint that happens as Philippines starts to get its independence. This one's hard to see, but it says Central Bank of the Philippines, because this one's really faded. It would be a little brighter on most bills. See above and below where it says Victory, Central Bank of the Philippines. These were overprinted a second time as the Central Bank of the Philippines took over as the issuer of money of the new independent Philippines, and continues to issue money today in the Philippines. A couple other interesting things happen. All right, so between 1941 and 1944, Filipino guerrillas and American advisors start to take back the Philippines before the Americans return, and they start to issue their own money. It's called guerrilla currency, and it's issued by like the guerrilla leading forces or local governments who are under guerrilla control, fighting the Japanese. So there's many different denominations. So I have a couple of examples here. They are also issued in pesos. The ones I have to show you all say United States on them somewhere. Not all of them do, but those are the ones that I like to that I've brought here to show you. And just kind of briefly, those are what those look like. And that was in that was between 40. A lot of them are they're 42, 43, or 44 is what they're all dated. And the Japanese also issued money while they were in control of the Philippines, also between 41 and 44. It was not well respected. The Filipinos would have preferred these, but you could get executed for using them because the Japanese tried to make everybody use these. 1, 5s, 10s, hundreds. There was a 500 that's not shown here, and also 1,000 in 1945. They started printing. The Filipino locals like to refer to this as Mickey Mouse money because of it was kind of pretend money, and it took thousands of them to buy anything, and got worse as the war went on. Well, all right, I think that was all the main points I wanted to talk about. And so hopefully this will provide something on Facebook to let people know a little bit about paper money in the Philippines.